adore this film. Just so you know a little bit about my background, I'm Ariel Basca. I'm a filmmaker, podcaster, author. I have a wide background in theater. I was a theater teacher for ages, and I also was a Latin teacher. And so the Bacchae is very specifically like all the things at once for me. So I have to say, like, being involved in social justice, the Bacchae, the all of it just worked so well for me in a way I never would have expected from a mockumentary about a theater production. But anyway,
Well, thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Thanks for that. Yeah.
So I wondered if you could talk about kind of where the idea for doing this came from, this incredible character that you play. I just am, kind of bowled over by exactly how you must have really spent a lot of time, Zora, on kind of crafting this character and making her likable in some strange way. And I'm very curious to know where the genesis of this came from.
It's funny you mentioned the Bacchae because Alec had seen me in a production of the Bacchae in 2016?
I think so.
Around there. And I feel like we just wanted to set it in her doing that show for the fun of it. But then later on in the editing, we're kind of like, oh wait, this like very much lines up with her and her like ego and wanting to be recognized, and the fact that Dionysus kind of flies under the radar. Everyone underestimates him, but he's like, I'm also God. I come from royalty and I'm here. So I just think that Daphne's ego has always been a huge part of just kind of like where she springs from. She started off as an improv character. And sort of the premise was that she already believed that she had reached this immense height in her career, even though no one's ever heard of her. So it just felt very parallel to that sort of like trying to prove yourself and level up and get back at the people that have underestimated you.
Yeah, and this was a character that Z had developed in high school. Zora and I went to the same high school. Shout out LaGuardia Arts. So she had been doing this character for many years, and we would meet up every few years and sort of talk about her and see where she was at. And then when Zora did the Bacchae, we kind of both realized like, oh, this is where she could be. What if Daphne was in her own production of the Bacchae? And it was a way for, I think, us to unpack a lot of things and to sort of create a heightened version of some of what Zora's experienced in the theater community and in the BFA, all those communities. Yeah. And it was a way to tell a story that we always say it's a story that will make you laugh and hopefully make you think. And that's what we wanted to do with this.
Yeah. Well, and it's also fascinating, because not only is this a subculture that I feel like I know very intimately, I feel like, by using the mockumentary form, you also highlight a lot of the toxicity within these subcultures that, people tend to gloss over for whatever set of reasons. And I just wondered, were you worried about the dangers of portraying that?
I definitely think when we were in the writer's room, aka Alec's room, there were a lot of moments of like, is this too much? But just continuing to write anyway. So I think we were very relieved when we started auditioning actors and they were laughing with us. We were like, okay, like, this is fine to talk about because we'll eventually have a larger conversation. I think like if you get people comfortable enough to sort of talk about something in a humorous way, then you can start unpacking it. There were definitely a lot of moments of like, this is fine, right? But
well, and it's
comedy, so
yeah, but it's also, one of those things where I think it is actually very daring sometimes to have a character who is a fake social justice warrior and you call her out as such. you know,
Right.
and just the weaponization of the concept of social justice that, you know, Daphne as a character involves herself in is kind of fascinating, as sort of a study in both, you know, the way that manipulation can take place in so many different ways. And
Right. Because I feel like, you know, people will talk about how racism and prejudice is so much more subtle these days, but I feel like it's become less subtle. And I feel like it's almost a disservice to not talk about it directly, because I just feel like if you don't, then it just gets perpetuated. So I just feel like this writing process was a good way for me to kind of shed some of that weight, or talk about things that have been uncomfortable or not as welcoming a space as it should be, or that you think would be.
Yeah, and it's very refreshing to see it done in that way, as opposed to, you know, and having those uncomfortable conversations about where, you know, these blind spots lead people to take advantage in ways that might not be appropriate, but then, you know, there's so much going on that's completely inappropriate, and, you know,
Right.
how do you bundle that all together is really fascinating. And
Yeah, and we definitely weren't interested in a story about a perfect hero coming into a flawed production and changing changing it for the better. To me, those stories just aren't interesting. And what was interesting about the character was that she is interested in progress. She at the end of the day is out for herself. And although she is right about a lot of what she's saying, her tactics are questionable. And, you know, she's definitely an imperfect character. And I think we've seen white men be able to play those types of flawed characters throughout film and theater. And I was excited about seeing Zora take that on. And I think there are people that get uncomfortable by that, but I really stand behind what we did. And I think there has to be room to create imperfect, complicated protagonists of all in all forms. And, you know, I think if an audience can accept Tony Soprano or Don Draper, they should be able to accept Daphne Wilco easily. I mean, you know, she hasn't killed anyone. She's just wants to lead, and she'll say what she has to say to get there.
And she's a powerful Black woman who wants what she wants.
Yes.
And I think that's incredible.
Yeah. I think, definitely the unlikable female lead was something we were thinking about a lot. Because I feel like there are so many boxes where if you step out of them, not to quote the movie, people are just like, it's condemned. They're like, no, don't, like, everything's comfortable. Stop trying to dismantle things. Like, people get very uncomfortable when you're just kind of like, hey, like, there's something kind of flawed with this, but we're all going along with it. But I think there's strength in speaking up.
Oh, for sure. And that's something that you see, you know, in the character of Daphne really clearly, you know, that she is not afraid to speak up for all of these things that are actual injustices going on around her. And it's really fascinating for me, knowing, you know, how toxic, you know, every theater production practically I ever worked on, you know, had those hidden relationships where, you know,
right,
everything is kind of like in the closet, and no one talks about it. No one talks about the relationship between the assistant director and the director. And and it's very interesting how she is the character, and, you know, the film as a whole makes something that is very tragic very funny.
Which, like, what do they say? Comedy is like tragedy plus time.
Right.
I never knew if that meant like the timing of something or the time passing and then it's funny. I don't know. But I do feel like, because I'm just thinking about the past year when Broadway was being called out about lack of diversity and about, you know, sexism. And then it sort of trickled, and I felt like a lot of theater departments, schools were kind of taking a step back and looking at themselves too. And you know, like I had a great experience in college, but there definitely was a lack of diversity that you could feel. You could feel it in which shows were picked for the season and who was the lead in those shows, and just people who consistently got opportunities to shine. So it's like, while I love theater and I love performing so much, I feel like if you do love something, you should be able to critique it and have an opinion about what's happening in an industry that you are a part of or aspiring to be a part of.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's a really well done critique, and I really appreciated how this film was crafted. And I wanted to know, like, how much of it was improv and how much of it was explicitly written.
I feel like we always look back and are amazed at how much of it was written. Because I mean, obviously, we wanted our actors to feel free to improvise and bring some of their own quirks and interpretations of these characters. Even from the audition process, we were like, do the scene as it's written, but also do a version of it that is just you. And a lot of that came onto set as well. We would do takes that were as written and then some kind of like looser takes. But I feel like it was important to us to kind of figure out what the roadmap was of each scene. It's like, we know that this is the conflict, or this is sort of the plot point we want to get to. So however you get there in this like fun way, make sure you hit that, you know, Daphne's being snubbed again, or that secret relationship is happening, or that sort of thing. We gave our actors room to play, but I do think there was a lot of structure there to play within.
Yeah, I always think that you have to give guidelines, because if you just say do an improv, it can be really anxiety producing for the actor. So like Zora said, we always said there's room to play, but this is where the scene needs to go. There's 7 different ways that it could get there. So let's do a take where we go this way. Let's do a take where we go that way. Because especially the way that we shot it, it was a very loose documentary style, where the camera was just kind of roving and trying to capture what was happening, a lot of zooming. So I think our hope was that our cast felt supported, but also free to try things. And I think that's where some of the best things are, is when you create an environment where they can try things that you would have never thought of in the writer's room, but are actually some of the funniest things in the movie.
Right. Yeah. And it was very affirming that people wanted to work on it because they enjoyed the writing and enjoyed the commentary and what we were trying to do with it.
Yeah. And I wonder, kind of like, how did other people react to kind of the messages you were trying to tell? Like, was it a situation where other people were equally passionate about the ideas, or, you know, were there shared experiences among the crew and cast that kind of brought you guys together on this?
Yeah, there's like a pretty tricky scene where Daphne sort of she basically says, I'm the only POC in this show. And then Gina is sitting right next to her and she's like, well, I'm a woman of color too. And I don't want to speak for Gina, but I think she felt like that was something that needed to be filmed, and that she that's happened to her, where she doesn't quite know where she stands. And sometimes when it's convenient, she's placed in a diversity box, and then other times she's not. So that was a tricky scene, because, you know, Daphne's doing something that's very imperfect, and we collaborated a lot with Gina to make sure that she felt right about it. And she was like, no, this has basically happened to me, and some not that clearly, but
right.
I think it was important that we weren't writing in a box, that we were writing in sort of an open space where the actors could come in, give us their input, do a table read. We always chatted with everyone, and you know, we were lucky that everyone we were pretty close friends with. So, you know, I could just call Gina. We could just call her and say, hey, does that scene feel weird to you? And it was a very collaborative environment.
No, and that scene in particular hit me pretty hard, because I know people who've also been in that situation as well, where they were repeatedly told by theater directors and other people that they were white when they are very much not white.
Right.
And this is kind of a recurring theme, but the way that plays out is actually with so much sensitivity you wouldn't expect from something that bills itself as a comedy. I keep going back to that, but I mean, it really is kind of fascinating how you take these microcosms of these specific issues within racism and sexism in the theater and deal with them in such a head-on way that looks great. So I think we lost Zora.
There was a lot of drilling happening across the street from me. I didn't know.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm going to. Okay. I am back. But but yeah, I think from early on when we were assembling our cast, I think people were very aware of the themes and how we were approaching them with a lot of sensitivity and mindfulness, but also kind of wanting to have fun so that people felt comfortable being like, this has happened to me in a subtle way or a very obvious way, or these are things that I've dealt with when working on a production.
Yeah. And now that you've made this film, which hopefully is going to be an enormous success, what are you guys thinking is kind of your next passion from here, where you want to take your next narrative?
I think I mean I definitely, I feel like the genre or the tone might change, but I feel like I definitely want to keep writing about social justice and about human rights and just like autonomy in general. I feel like that's very important to just express, because I feel like I know I'm constantly holding on to a lot of anger and outrage, and I feel like writing is a great way to sort of release that. So I definitely want to keep making that my focus and what I create next and what Alec and I create next.
Yeah, I think we both definitely want to continue working on Daphne. We're not exactly sure in what capacity, but she just is a character that we both really love and want to see where she goes next and where she takes us next. And yeah, we've had the privilege of, you know, showing the movie all over the country and going to different film festivals together, and sort of Daphne was this very small thing that was just for Z and I, and then for our cast and crew, and now it's sort of expanded, and it's nice to hear that people like her and have personal connections with it. And yeah, we've been really lucky that the film has been received so positively, and we're excited to see where she takes us next.
Yeah, because I feel like there are so many spaces for her to interrogate, for sure.
Yeah. But what is it specifically for you two about comedy that you think brings, you know, all of this to light in a unique way?
I really think it's us having the same sense of humor. I just feel like even in our friendship, we find like the same quirky things hilarious, or just are very aware of people's behavior. And I feel like it's great to write from that place of kind of realizing at the core, most people are trying to do their best and not offend anyone and sort of get along. But there are those tricky moments where we miss the mark. And I think, I don't know, there's a great deal of humanity in comedy. And I think we're both pretty attuned to that and like writing into that.
Yeah, I think the way that I think of it is that we sort of have our own different spheres. Like Zora is a poet and a screenwriter and a prose writer, and she has her own private, or not private, but her own individual writing, and I do too. And then comedy is this thing where we come together and it just really clicks. And I think a lot of that is that when you meet someone when you're 14 and grow up together, you really, there's just a similarity in pop culture reference.
Right.
I can be like, remember our 9th grade math teacher? Like, you know, there's these, I would walk up to her on set because she'd be acting in a scene and I'd be watching it and I'd say, oh, can you do and I'd say something. None of the other actors would understand what I was like, what is that note? But she would know exactly what I meant by me saying 3 words. She'd be like, right. And it's like you have that shorthand because of the years spent together, of the time writing together. And I think you just understand each other's sensibilities, and it really streamlines the process and makes it really fun.
Yeah.
Well, you made something that is immensely fun to watch, and so I'm so glad it exists in this world, and and I hope you guys continue making great work, and I can't wait to see your next one. So
Thank you.
thank you so much
Thank
for
you
this
so
interview.
much.
This has been a delight.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you.